Okay, welcome back. I want to talk about something very important, and it's the idea that Christianity as a whole is the unifying doctrine of the West and the superior one at that. Now, the whole reason the West developed in the first place was attributed to the sort of evangelicalization of the world. You could call it that, where basically through evangelism and conversion, the Western world was revolutionized through Christianity. Because in the past, you had all the different, ethnic groups of Western Europe vying for power through tribes, kingdoms, petty squabbles, and, you know, there wasn't a lot of high society. There wasn't a lot of philosophy. There wasn't a lot of free thinking, you know, development of ideas and concepts, development of technologies, development of high society, as it were. And through Christianity, it gave everyone in Europe something to get behind. A philosophy where people of all nations are one, and as Christians, we are brothers. And through the gospel, we need to preach that, if you become Christian, you can be redeemed in the eyes of God through Jesus Christ and be saved and given salvation. Now, a lot of these ideas sort of remove our animalistic urges and tendencies, right? They give us a guided framework in order to live as humans. You know, we follow the example of Jesus, right? In order to be better humans in the eyes of God. Imago Dei, we are one of God. We are created in the image of God, etc. And this gave us a moral compass, set of principles, and ethics to follow behind. You know, it created this idea that in order to be successful as humans, we need to follow in the example of Jesus. He is the example that we need to follow in order to be good Christians. And this really evangelicalized, the West and gave us a sort of, you know, foundation for society, if it were. So after Christianity was adopted, in the Dark Ages, you really saw the rise of kingdoms from the, you know, tribes of Europe, kingdoms forming. You had the Brits or the, Anglo Saxons, developing their kingdoms in Britain. And through monasteries and, you know, fusion of the church and the state, you really saw a sort of unity in Europeans you hadn't seen really, since the Roman Empire. Why is this important? Well, I believe through this unity, it really allowed us to develop as a society. So, monks, you know, and priests and bishops and, members of clergy, had this time to sort of like depict at scripture and aspects of the Bible and sort of commentate on it, picking apart different ideas and concepts, fleshing them out, debating them amongst their peers about, you know, what it means to be a good Christian, or, how can we better, Christianity for people across the world, and that really led to the church being the centralized power that had authority, over kings, you know, different noble factions, through the Pope, or, you know, through, different church like denominations. It really, it really tamed the individualistic sort of behavior of monarchs. You know, it was the sort of equalizing force that was needed to keep monarchs in check and develop for the good of the people. A lot of people argue that like Christians, the Catholic Church kept people in the dark and stuff like that. But without the Catholic Church, you wouldn't have this sort of centralized communal aspect, this institution, you know, that sought to better the country in a way. You wouldn't have that. There's nothing that can replace that will succeed or be as good as unification of the church and the state. You will have nothing that could ever replicate that, in my opinion. So, because of that, you know, we had these sort of guiding principles emerge for that, for, things like the Crusades, where allied nations, because they were Christian, we had a sort of duty or a sense of obligation to help them as, brothers in arms, because of our shared understanding of Christ. And because of that, you would have things like the Crusades, which was basically a coalition of Christian nations to, quell the rising powers of the East. Let's just say, the Arabs and the Mongols, and, different warring tribes. And because of this time, this I think is actually, this really gave way through a shared sort. It's sort of like this coalition of Christian, countries really allowed for more time, because these countries were considered to be more safe and protected, and it really gave us time to follow our intellectual pursuits. So it gave rise to the Renaissance, the time of enlightenment, where history, art, and culture really, really coalesced and became something beautiful and something symbolic, and inspired the population, galvanized the population to really find what it meant to be European at the time. And, what follows after the time of enlightenment? Well, then you get into, high society. You get into the forming of parliaments, politics, the advancement of science, the advancement of technology. Debate happens about that to, sort of legitimize it and progress it forward in society. Without Christianity as a building block of Western society, it would not exist at all, right? And that draws parallels to what it means to be Roman as well. Because the Romans saw themselves as this united front. The legion, high society, politics, technology, science, philosophy. These higher intellectual pursuits come because there's time for individuals to actually think about these things, to investigate them, to come up with ideas. During downtime or leisure, that is the pursuit of intellectual, progress. So, that fast forward to, the founding of America. That was a largely Anglican, not Anglican, Protestant nation. And that came about because, there were schisms in Christianity. Different founders created different, schools of thought. And that progressed over time into, what is now the United States. And yeah, that's the impact Christianity has had. In over 2,000 years, or 1,500 years, we emerged from the ashes of the Roman Empire and founded a whole new society with multinational, connections. Multinational connections that transcend race, religion, race, culture, stuff like that. I was going to say religion, but that doesn't make sense. And that culminates into what we have today, which is, the West. Like, you have places that are classified as Western countries, such as Australia, right? They're on the other side of the globe. They've got nothing to do with Western Europe. But that's how far reaching the West is perceived to be because, of things like the British Empire, colonialism. That all came through Christianity. And I think colonialism is a net positive, if you ask me. It uplifted different countries that weren't a part of Europe. It really expanded horizons, right, of the human condition, really. As we can be, part of the same movement across the globe in different countries. This idea of globalism. But recently, there's been a concerted effort in the last, I don't know, maybe 100 years to really diminish the importance of Christianity in society and how it's had a huge impact on the West. It's pretty much made it what it is today. There's a huge concerted effort to label Christians as backwards, as animalistic, as, the old news, ancient history. And these people do not realize that without this central pillar that is Christianity in our society, it will cease to exist. They seem to think that the separation of the church and state was this wonderful thing, but it's not. And the reason it's not is because when you remove the doctrine of, say, Catholicism or Anglicanism, which was a central key unifying philosophy, it is a philosophy in many ways from the Australian country, right? Remove it from that country, and you get these social movements that promote freedom, right? They promote the idea that responsibility is not a virtue, that chastity is not a virtue, that uh, respecting the core tenets of the gospel is considered to be oppressive, and that we need to promote the differences between us, that to be weird and to be animalistic and to give in to one's temptations is considered to be a virtue now. That's what the removal of state and religion, like the separation, has really done. And as you can see in the last, I want to say, well, it started really in the 60s, but it's coalesced now into something terrifying that has really been accentuated in the last 20 years, I want to say. The last 20 years is when the degeneracy has really started to rear its ugly head. You have things like mass divorce, things like single parent households, things that we would consider to be abhorrent and backwards and antithetical to what you would consider to be high society, right? What you would think to be strive to be better for, you know? It's completely antithetical to Christianity and what it's built. Liberated sexual degeneracy. This liberal way of thinking that we can give into our carnal desires without any I can't say this word. Reciprocity. Sorry, I don't have a script to go on. I'm just voicing my opinion. And without this, this sort of like, it almost is in a way top down control, you know, through God, through the king, through his nobles, through the priests, through the clergy, through the man and his family and the household. This chain of this, it's like a spiritual chain of command has been broken, been dissolved. It means absolutely nothing now. And as a result, the society is just suffering because of it. We have a rise in crime, rise in disaffected youth. It's really exponential at this point, and it's getting worse and worse by the day as we think borders don't matter, right? We can just let a bunch of people in and she'll be right. We can. I'm basing it in Australia, by the way. And this idea that we think that we are better than God Himself, which is heresy, outright heresy. It's just a perfect storm of decay but it's not perfect, is it? It's top down sort of social engineering to be that way, in my opinion. But I won't say who's causing that here. So we arrive at this point where society is in abject decay. You could compare it to the 400s in the fall of the Roman Empire. That's what you could compare it to. Because where ideological rot lies a crumbling society with no unifying principles or doctrine. So that's sort of what I wanted to say. I don't think I could put it into better words without, I don't know, being smarter. I don't know. Um I'm sure if I like get comments I could really pick at different points and like debate about it. But even then I hate the word debate because it implies that you need to have a victory over someone without having an intellectual conversation. So yeah, that's my opinions on Christianity and why it's actually the, the net positive doctrine of Western society, and it's I think it's the most superior one ever invented, more superior than the Roman doctrine. You know, what is the Roman doctrine? Roman unifying Roman Empire. We'll have to say like Roman Empire because they see they brought it straight back to Christianity. Christianity is a huge W. Roman Empire ruled Mediterranean. Yeah, we know. Fundamentally based on the concept of a single, divinely ordained world order, where the emperor held supreme authority as the central figure of both political and religious power. Okay, that's the state sort of doctrine, but you see how that has parallels to Christianity? I find that very interesting. Powerful strategy for unifying empires. It's called the imperial cult. Yeah. Christianity you could class as a cult, but it's been a net positive. So is a cult really bad if it's a net positive? That's what I want to ask. The emperor served as the Pontifex Maximus, central religious authority. Yeah, so he would sacrifice to his gods and stuff like that. Yeah, this philosophy meshes really well with Christianity because, like, the religion is at the center of the state. If you convert the state religion, it meshes really well as the new order. Yep. Approach to religion also facilitated the unification and assimilation of diverse peoples. They were known for tolerance. What does that remind you of? Christianity. They're very tolerant of different ethnic groups. You know, Christianity really elevated us above animals and our tribalistic tendencies, if you think about it. Without Christianity, we are very animalistic and tribal. Just look at left wing politics. It's all they talk about. They talk about race and ethnicity. So, Roman Empire's adoption of Christianity under Theodosius I in 380 AD was an attempt to unify the empire under a single cohesive ideology. So, what that means is that the reason they needed to do this in the first place, like if you think about it, was a matter of survival, which I think is beautiful. Building on Constantine's earlier legalization of Christianity. So, because the Roman Empire was evangelized the whole world as a result, under the ruins of the Roman Empire was able to be evangelized. It extended to the Byzantines as well. Yep. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Christianity as a unifying doctrine of the West. Yeah, let me know what you think. I might make more of these. I don't know. I just feel like I want to talk what I want to talk about. Yeah, I don't care about views or anything. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one.